We can start with the family part.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode, or not an episode, but another webinar hosted by PALCUS. Today we are going to be talking about immigrating, living, and working in the United States. And this was an important topic because as a national organization, we get a lot of inquiries from people in Portugal that are wanting to come and live and work here in the United States. They're asking about the process to immigrate and live and work here. They're asking about job availability or what kinds of jobs they should be asking or they should be applying for. And so we get a lot of questions about it. And so we thought it would be helpful to host this webinar, answer some of those basic questions, and set those folks on the right path. So today's presenters are Cynthia Russo and George Russo, who are with the Russo firm, mother and son here. Nice to have the family, keep the business in the family, if you will. So thank you, Cynthia and George, for joining us.
No problem.
And just going to do a quick plug here that, with all of our webinars, if you find them useful, we really encourage you to become a member of PALCUS because it's our membership dues that really help us to be able to host these webinars for the community and other events. And you get all of these wonderful benefits here as being a member. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to have a conversation with Cynthia and George. So thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
No problem. We're glad to join.
Yeah.
Excellent. So why don't you just give our viewers and perhaps listeners a little bit of about yourselves and how you came to focus on immigration law?
Okay, well, I'll start. My dad was Portuguese and my mom worked with the Foreign Service. And there were always immigrants coming into our home since we were children. And when I went to college, though, I became an art teacher, and then I switched careers and decided to become a lawyer because I translate with another lawyer who specialized in immigration. And I found it very interesting. And I thought, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I want to be a people lawyer to help people. And so that's how it started. So it's been, it'll be 40 years. And our firm is basically word of mouth. And now my son, George Russo, is an attorney, joined us 2 years ago, and he's carried on the business now, and he's enjoying it, he says. What do you say, George?
Very nice.
So then George will tell us a little bit about himself.
Well, I have my experiences in litigation, criminal and civil, and now I'm doing this. So a wide variety of experience.
Right. And you're certified in what states?
New York, New Jersey, and Florida.
Okay. All right.
Excellent.
So just a little information to start. Immigration is federal law. So if we have to go to other states, we have no problem appearing on behalf of a person that needs help because
Okay.
immigration is federal law. So I myself have traveled to many other states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maryland, and we have a case in Georgia. So there are, and New York, of course. So it's interesting in a way that you can travel and meet other people as well, and you can help other people that really want a good information, because there's a lot of people out there that take advantage of immigrants that want to come and live and work in the United States. It's supposed to be the American dream, although
Right.
really it's a little tough, but we do our best to be honest and give you the truth. And I guess it stands for being in business for so long.
Right.
Okay.
So can we just go through the basics? Like someone's in Portugal and says, I want to go live and work in the United States. What's the first thing they do?
Okay, well, the first thing,
Is it not that
the first
simple?
thing
It
we
might
do,
not.
the
It
first
might
thing
not
we
be
need
that
to
simple.
ask them is, do you have a relative in the United States? That's always the easier route. Not
Oh,
necessarily the quickest, but if you have a relative in the United States and it's a qualifying relative, for example, spouse, of course, if you marry, that's pretty much what a lot of people know. If you marry an American, then of course you can immigrate and work. If your parents are legal residents, they can file for an unmarried son, daughter, even if they are over 21. They can always file for the minor children as well. If they're citizens, if your parents are citizens, then they can file for siblings. Anyone who's a citizen can file for their siblings. From Portugal, though, it comes under a category of that takes very long. Right now, it's taking 16 years
oh my gosh.
to file for your brother and you're an American citizen. Yeah. I mean, it used to always be the longer category because the relationship is more distant than an immediate relative.
Mhm.
But 16 years is really crazy. There are some new things coming out. President Biden is trying to do a family unity type of program where if you've had a petition approved by a relative and you have a wait, he supposedly we can apply for a parole and an entry into the United States earlier and not have to wait that long. That's brand new. It just came out in October. We don't know. We don't have the guidelines on that yet, but that is something that he's trying to do because, as you know, probably we've been, unsuccessful in getting anything through Congress. Maybe George would like to speak on that as to why we've been unable to get an immigration law through Congress.
Because well, simply put, because it's a two-party system in the US and they both hate each other.
Oh, well, okay.
So
That's a little blunt. Okay,
It's truth, right?
right. Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
it's not like Portugal where they apparently functioned without like a president for a while, if I'm correct.
Yeah, the prime minister.
Yeah.
Mm.
Although Portugal's a
Okay.
whole different story.
Maybe
Well,
after
yeah.
Yeah.
presidential they'll pass something, but
So, I mean, there have been amendments, executive orders, even, for example, the DACA kids, the Dreamers.
Yeah.
Those are things that the president can do that does not have to go through Congress, even though it's being litigated right now. We believe that it still stands.
Got
So, if you don't have a family relative in the United States, then the thing is you would have to come, based upon a sponsor for a work position. So there's different categories of that. George can talk to, for example, we have an advanced, national interest waiver visa where you would not need a sponsor. That's a good thing. And who in Portugal would qualify for that off the bat that you could think of?
famous scientists, doctors.
So these are people that have a really unique skill and it's in the
They have a
national
unique skill and
interest.
they have to be a person of national interest where they have either, depending on their field, they have published something in magazines of their peers. They have appeared on, in theater and they've won awards. They're great sports people like who could come easily.
There's a special visa for sports athletes.
Right. But they definitely could qualify on national interest.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Any professional soccer player.
Like your favorite?
Yeah. Ronaldo. Sure.
Yeah.
Ronaldo. Okay. A famous chef, someone who's
Okay.
a singer.
So almost like it's like a celebrity visa, essentially,
Yes,
is kind
that
of
kind
what
of
it is. Got it. Okay.
Now, if you have an advanced degree and you would like to come over and you also have certain awards and things, that is possible as well. Usually that category works better if you have a company sponsoring you. So a university will sponsor you, a corporation is going to bring you in as a scientist to do certain research. So you have to have your degrees evaluated. There's companies that will take your Portuguese degree and they will tell you what it equates to in an American degree. According to the US standards, it cannot be a 3-year university degree. like certain countries, their bachelor's degree, like India, is 3 years, but that doesn't qualify for an American university degree. It has to be 4 years.
Got
So
it.
depending on if you're Portuguese graduate of a university, you have to have the 4 years. Okay, and then after those degrees, we also have a skilled worker, someone who is an accountant, or someone works in a manager of a company. They have an advanced degree, and they also have a sponsor that will offer a position to them.
Okay.
And then we
On
have
that, if I could just ask a question on that,
Yes.
because a lot of questions that we get, I would say the people have what would be considered service job skills or blue collar, right? So they're a hairdresser, they work in a restaurant, they like kinds of those kinds of jobs. For something like that, is there a path for
Yes, there is.
immigration? Okay, okay.
That was the next
Oh, sorry.
category. No, that's okay. That's okay. If they have at least 2 years experience in one of those things, like hairdresser or carpenter or mason, they're a skilled worker. So they definitely need a sponsor, and we would have to get, they would have to pay the prevailing wage, be willing to pay the prevailing wage, which is usually equivalent to almost the union wage. So it's high. So a company would have to have a number of employees. There's no set amount, but you have to show that they have to show their tax return then to get approved when going through the process, and they have to be willing to pay the prevailing wage. It gets a little complicated with those type of positions, because prior to 2001, where someone could come from Portugal, they could find a sponsor, they could work here, and they would pay their dues in 3-4 years or 5 years, they'd be legal. But since, we have unlawful presence since 2001, and there has been no immigration law to help legitimize those people that become unlawful and stay in those jobs, they would literally have to wait outside the US. So you're talking about an employer that is willing to wait 3-4 years
to hire
do all
someone.
the paperwork and be willing to pay the prevailing wage and show that on the books. So it is much more difficult, because in the past, if the employee was here, even if they were unlawful and they were working towards that legality, they would get paid. They had a W-2, and that would count towards the prevailing wage.
Okay.
So it's yeah. And then we also have the unskilled. That's the same issue. It's not as bad, but like a nanny or some janitor, that's the same type of thing. You still have to go through a labor certification. You have to apply. You have to get the prevailing wage. A live-in nanny, for example, has to be paid minimum right now of like $650 a week, with room and board and food. And so you have to go through the process first through the labor department. It gets approved, then you go to immigration, then you have to make sure that that company or that sponsor has the financials that will allow that to get approved. And then they do the consular processing now, which by the way is in Paris now. It used to be in Lisbon, but since there's not many Portuguese coming over, the only visas they're handling in Lisbon are the non-immigrant temporary workers or something of that nature. Now, everybody that we legalize, we are still legalizing Portuguese people, but they go to Paris to get.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess they used to be able to go to the U.S. Embassy in Lisbon to do that, but now they have to go to the U.S. Embassy in Paris.
Yeah, I guess it was a policy decision, because they shouldn't have as many employees in Lisbon if they're not really processing applications as much.
True.
Because
Very true.
I mean, the applications of like the type you mentioned, the hairdresser, the mason, the carpenter, the painter, that's the majority of Portuguese farmers, landscapers. So since they're not coming anymore because they can't come and stay, they literally have to have a boss that signs papers for 3-4 years when that boss really needs them now.
Right.
So now they eliminated Liz. Yeah, it's been Paris for at least, I would say, maybe 4 years now.
Okay. And is there a minimum amount of time that the sponsor has to be willing to employ that person? So for example, they commit to employing them for 5 years or something. Was that ever a thing? And is that still the case? Okay.
Well, people might think it's a thing, but in New Jersey, law and most states, you cannot force a person to continue a work contract. So
Okay.
usually, for example, in the past, when they got legalized through a labor case, uh, there wasn't a set time period, but we always recommended at least 6 months if you could, because you're going to then become a citizen eventually, and they're going to look back to see if you actually went to the employer after you obtained your permanent residence. So it's
Okay.
not like set in stone, but I mean, there have been certain immigration officers that when you go to become a citizen, they have asked for an income tax return showing that when you entered and when you became legal, even if you worked for them when you were not, when you became legal, did you get paid? Did you get paid the wage that the contract said you were going to get paid? And if you
Hmm.
didn't, they may say it was fraud, and that could be an issue later on. So
Okay.
we always recommend, but it's not 5 years or a year.
Okay. That's good to know. That's good to know. So the hairdresser that hires the person doesn't have to keep them on for a
No,
certain amount of
no,
time. Okay. Okay. Good to
no,
know.
they don't have to. Yeah. And,
Um,
also if they're not fulfilling their job duties too, because the job duties
right.
are specified, are pretty specific, then the employer could always let them go, or if they're not getting paid the wage, they could, this is actually a thing right now going on that, if they are not getting paid the wage they're supposed to, they can file a complaint with Department of Labor, and there's actually a way that they can get their work permission if they're in the US. So
Oh,
that's,
okay.
yeah.
So, now what happens though if a company sponsors somebody, they come over and um that person wants to leave the job? Do they have to get another company to sponsor them because they're still not a legal resident, right? If
Yes.
assuming
Yes.
they've filed that paperwork and are going through that process, but it still hasn't been approved, so they have to get another company to sponsor them in order for them to stay. Would that be the case,
Yes,
or
that
do
is the
they?
case. They
Okay.
can
Okay.
change sponsors. They have to go through the process with the new sponsor, and it has to be that they're still within the time frame that they were allowed to be legal.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We have quite a few people that I think want to try and actually someone emailed us about 2 weeks ago with this question. I'm going to come visit the United States. Um, are there jobs that I can apply to so that I can stay and live and work? So
Okay.
I
Okay. So
don't really
one
think that's a
thing,
path, right? Like they would have to go back and start the application process
yeah,
for everything, right? Okay.
if you're Portuguese, you and Europeans that have visa waiver, which means
Mhm.
you did not, no longer have to go to the American embassy and request a visa and prove that you're coming on vacation, that you have enough money, that
Mhm.
you're able to do this, that you've traveled before to other places, that you're not just going to come and stay in the US and overstay. So that's, I mean, you come visa waiver, that allows you that courtesy, but anyone who comes on visa waiver cannot extend their visa, cannot change their visa, cannot become a student. They have to go back to Portugal and they have to apply for that non-immigrant visa in Lisbon, or if they, they could also apply in Porto if they, no, not Porto anymore. No, just Lisbon.
No, okay. But
Yeah.
they could use their time here to either do interviews or talk to
Yes.
people or try to
Yeah.
make contacts, but they
Yes.
have to go back and go through the proper process.
Yes. They
Got it.
certainly can do that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think you had a list of topics you were going to cover and I keep interrupting you. So go,
No, no,
what was
no.
the next
We
way?
we don't have
Okay.
that anymore. Well, there's always the visa lottery, but I guess the Portuguese know about that, right? They have
I don't know
to,
about that.
really?
I
Portugal's in the
don't.
visa lottery. Yes, Portugal's in the visa lottery. It just
Okay.
finished yesterday. They give it's a lottery of visas. And as long as you have at least you're a skilled worker or you've graduated high school, you can apply for this visa lottery. And we've had clients that have won it and they
Oh,
become legal.
wow. Okay.
It's every year in October, and the results come out in April. You have to just literally, it's done online. You submit your photo, you fill out a form, and as long as you're not, you don't have a criminal background and you're not inadmissible for any other reason, you could win the visa lottery and become legal that way.
And how many do they give out each time?
What's that?
How many, I guess, winners of the lottery are there every year?
50, I believe there's 55,000. Is it on the bulletin? Did you print it?
Wow.
50,000, yeah.
Wow.
That's that's worldwide.
Worldwide, sure, but
So
yeah.
if we look, for example, is this the November one, the November visa bulletin? And we look to see employment, okay. All right, so this is it, right? November available, okay. So in Africa, they have 10,000 available, Asia 2,300, Europe 5,000, which would include Portugal.
Okay.
And then of course they have, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, Iran, Nepal, Russia, Uzbekistan, Oceania, South America 500. So every year, and what happens is if you win the visa, you get a number.
Okay.
And based upon the lower the number it is, the better chance you have of actually immigrating as a resident. And then once you win, you filed the paperwork, and then by the summertime, and then you have an interview at the embassy, and you come into September, and then October opens up again.
That's literally the fastest way.
I mean, it's not an easy way, but it is one way.
And it sounds like the fastest way as well.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the fastest way. Yeah, it's definitely the fastest way. Because if we go back even to categories of, like, if you're in Portugal and you have George, what was that? Unmarried F1, unmarried sons and daughters of citizens. So how long is that taking?
January 2015.
So if you literally have unmarried sons and daughters of citizens, you have to file your petition. They're working on January 2015.
People that applied then. Wow.
That's how long it's taking.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's an 8-year backlog.
It's actually quicker if you are a spouse or unmarried son or daughter of a permanent resident, not a citizen. It's actually been quicker, and it's from what year?
February 2019.
Still, it's a 4-year backlog. Wow.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Now, let's say a student wants to come to college here. They've graduated high school in Portugal and they want to come to college here in the United States. Is that something where they have to find a school that's willing to sponsor them as a student, or is there a specific process that covers all schools?
No, it doesn't cover all schools. The university has to have an immigration number, which means that they accept foreign students. So most four-year universities do. Some of the county colleges, most of them do. There's other private schools that are, a little less money, but some of them are not as legit, and they don't always have a number. So you always have to make sure you apply to a school that has a foreign student program. And then you would have to, if you want to have your degree evaluated, you could go online and apply to one of the outfits that do that. One of them is WES, World Education Services, and they do that all online. You submit your degree, where you graduated from, and they will tell you what your degree equates to. If you want to continue in the US and get a master's degree or a PhD, and if you want to just learn English, you just have to make sure that you're going to a school that has an immigration number, and you go through the process of application, and they then give you a form, an I-20A, and then you also have to prove that you can financially support yourself when you come to the United States. So you would need somebody, you can either have a sponsor, a relative, or some friend that will have to show their tax return and prove that you can live with them, or you can show that you have money in the bank sufficient to come and study. I mean, the bare minimum for 1 year on a county college is $10,000 in classes and fees and registration.
Got
So
it.
you can't
Okay.
even go, there's nothing under that. And then you have to prove at least probably 10,000 in living fees, in room and board and that kind of thing.
Got it.
That's like the cheapest, you know.
Right.
So once you get your I-20 and your sponsorship, you then go to make an appointment at the embassy and you would apply for a student visa. It's not guaranteed, and so you want to make sure if you're going to a university or college that your application fee may not be refundable. That might be, I don't know, $300-400, but at least if you paid the semester to enter, you want to make sure that you can get that back if you don't get approved when you go to the embassy.
Oh, okay.
You usually take that document and the sponsorship, you go to the embassy, providing they believe you, everything looks legit, they'll look up the number online, then you come as a student. And then once you're here, Portuguese student, American student from Portugal, you can renew. It's a lot easier. You just have to prove that you're going to school,
Right.
that you're, there are situations where I had one Portuguese person that was a student, and then we managed to get them a work authorization, which is not usually the norm. It was during COVID, and that was a special situation. But there is a little out that they possibly could get that, but it's not usually the norm. Usually they're
Okay.
studying and they have the money and somebody is, bankrolling them.
And so if a Portuguese student came here to go to college and they wanted to work at Starbucks, is that something that they could do?
They're not supposed to work unless they apply for that special work permission. They have
Okay.
to prove financial necessity after and that kind of thing. And
Okay.
it is possible. It's not usually the norm, because usually when you're done with the English classes, or let's say you're finishing a degree, you would change to practical training, a lot of them, which means
Got
a
it.
company could hire you for a little while. And you're doing
Okay.
practical training. With practical training, yes, you can work. And then from the student, you can go from practical training then to an H-1B, which would be a company sponsoring you with a bachelor's degree and something. It's still temporary, but it's for 3 years, and you're able to work here and travel. And then you can eventually file for permanent as well, as long as that company is willing to sponsor you for permanent. It
Got
all
it.
has to be going on at the same time. But it's a long process and everything's been delayed. So
Yeah.
anybody with an H-1B, usually we have to renew it. So you're talking about paying for, you've done your practical training and we're paying for an H-1B for 3 years, and then you have to renew the H-1B because your permanent hasn't been processed enough yet. You can file at the same time, but it still has to go through the process.
Got it. And does your time as a student, like, let's say you got approved to be a student, foreign student, and you're going to school, then can you simultaneously apply for legal residency at that time as well, or do you have to
No,
wait?
no, you can't unless you get married to someone. No.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah, you
then,
can't.
let's
Because
say,
what happens is, as a student, it's an F-1 visa. You cannot have dual intent. It's a temporary visa. You're telling the government, I'm only here to study. That's why you have to go even to an approved school,
okay.
because some people have come in and then they've decided to leave school. They're like, I don't want to pay for this anymore. I just want to work. And what's happening now recently more than ever is if the school reports this to ICE, to immigration, and then they'll send you to the judge for deportation. That's even people who are even here, let's say they're on a normal visitor's visa, not visa waiver. If they try to extend their visa and they're not given, because they give you 6 months sometimes. Portuguese, no, they come on the visa waiver.
Right.
But, there might be some Brazilians that come on a tourist visa. They usually give you 6 months when you enter.
Okay.
And if you file for an extension, like Uncle Sam was going to say, like, how could you be here 6 months? Are you like Rockefeller?
Yeah.
Immediately say you're not getting another 6 months.
Yeah.
In the past, like 20 years ago, they didn't care that much about these things because they had a lot of work to do. They were legalizing immigrants. They were doing all this. It was a good, it was like, okay, I paid my dues. It was like a flush of the system. Just like, the Irish in the 30s and the 40s and
Right.
the Italians. We've never had a time
And
period like today where it's so difficult for someone to try to earn a living and work here. It's really difficult.
and to that point, what are you seeing as far as like these are the kinds of applications that are getting approved most? We're seeing these get rejected or anything like that.
Well, I've always done asylum and refugees. That I've always done that, but it was a small part of the practice.
Mhm,
Now with a lot of, especially like Brazil, Ecuador, and countries that were safe before that are becoming a little less safe, we've seen a lot of that in the past 7, 8 years.
okay.
Portugal, not as much. Portugal, people from Portugal get a little desperate. They come and then sometimes they stay. And then unfortunately, they've taken advice from people that promised them a work card to do it the right way.
Mm,
You've been here 10 years. You can get legal. You have American kids. You can use the 10-year law. What they don't know is, and what they're not telling them is that you have to be in deportation proceedings to get this 10-year law. It is not that easy. You can't just have American children. You have to prove extreme and unusual hardship to these American children. So unless they have a disability or they have such serious medical conditions, it's
mhm,
not that easy to get this. So the majority is still a lot of family petitions.
okay.
Parents become residents, or maybe their kids are here and they call the parents, and then the parents call the other kids. And then we have waivers that, if it's extreme hardship to your parent who's a
Mhm,
Portuguese resident, not even a citizen, we've done waivers for Portuguese
okay,
people that are older, and then that's how they're getting in. So it's
got it.
still, the family part is still more, it's stronger now.
So when you talk about people have this misconception about the 10-year law, is that because maybe they married an American citizen and then they came here, but then they
No,
stayed?
no, it's usually uh they came as Portuguese citizens. They decided to stay because they got a good job, you know. So they're here
Okay.
unlawful. So after they're
There,
here 10
yes, and just
years,
to be, that's unlawfully, like
yeah,
they got a job, but it wasn't the sponsored.
right. They
Right.
got a job, but it wasn't the spot. So they paid their taxes. They did everything they should have done. They didn't get in trouble with the law. They didn't, commit a crime of moral turpitude. That's a whole other area.
Mm,
But usually, they've been a good person trying to do the right thing. And they're here 10 years and they have 2 children, let's say, one child. And then some person who gives them the wrong advice says, okay, you file an asylum claim just to get into the court, and then we could change it to the 10-year law.
mm,
So they basically file an asylum claim even though they don't qualify. It happens to some Portuguese families now, which has become, they're getting desperate. And then when they get to court before the judge, there is no asylum, of course, for Portugal.
mhm.
Then they have an opportunity to change it to the 10-year law, but usually it's not that easy to get it done, right? Approved. The statistics are,
Really
maybe
low.
28%. I mean, because you literally have to have the income tax 10 years above the poverty guidelines. You could not have collected, and a lot of the Portuguese families do not collect money or aid from the government. They do their own thing. They work
Right, right,
construction or whatever.
right.
It's just so difficult when they do it
Mhm.
that way. So and there's a small percentage of them that have the connection to come and find a sponsor and do it the right way.
Yeah,
There are people that still come. I mean, there's really talented Portuguese people, universities, professors, that kind of thing.
right.
And they usually know because the university does a lot of
Will
their
help
legal
them.
work for them to come
Right,
over. Or
right,
corporations have in-house counsel
right,
to bring over someone that they really want, a manager,
right,
that type
right.
of thing.
And so for the skilled workers, if they did find, a construction company or a hair salon or someone to sponsor them, what are the costs to the sponsor? What are the costs to the company? Just so that,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
people know.
The company will pay is supposed to pay the first part of the process, the labor certification, and so it would probably be about $3,000 to the company
Up front.
upfront. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And that's to the IRS to pay the fees and
No,
all
no,
of
no,
that.
no,
No?
no, no. That's like to file all the paperwork. There's certain fees, and then to immigration, and then usually what happens is the alien can pay part of it, and then the person coming pays the adjustment and the other parts of the fees.
Which would be a couple thousand as
Well,
well.
it costs for a skilled worker, you're not going to pay less than $10,000 total.
Wow.
But you're talking about 3 to 4 years, and you're talking about becoming a permanent resident.
Okay.
Compare, for example, the person who came as a student became a H-1B, a sponsor person for 3 years. They had to pay at least 4,000 or 5,000 for each H-1B. So they're paying 10,000 plus at the same time they got to pay the permanent. They're paying 20.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Because they're
Yeah.
here working the same time.
Right.
What you realize is the one is the temporary. You're paying a temporary visa to work legally at the prevailing wage, but it's only giving you 3 years. Then
Okay.
you have to do the whole process again. And then if you're filing for skilled worker and it's permanent and hairdresser or carpenter or mason, you have to wait 3, 4 years. If you're lucky, maybe 3, but you're becoming a resident when you enter.
Got it.
A lot of sponsors are skeptical of this because there is no time frame, like you asked the question before. How long do I have to work with a sponsor? There is no time frame. So technically they could come, they could say, okay, I'm working there for 6 months and I'm leaving.
And then I'm out. Yeah,
And the
yeah.
sponsor waited 3, 4 years, turned over all his income tax return, did all this bother of answering the questions, being subjected to an audit, which almost all of them are audited right now. It wasn't as much in the past. That's what delays the process because there's almost always audits.
Okay. So it's funny because a lot of people talk about back in the day, my grandfather sponsored my uncle, meaning I don't know what fees were involved 50 years ago, but it was almost like I vouch for this person. They can work on my ranch. They'll live in my house. And, it seemed like as long as you knew somebody that was willing to give you a job somewhere, it was kind of much easier. And that was how a lot of Portuguese people came over, right? But now it's still helpful if you know somebody, but it's going to be a lot more expensive. There's a lot more paperwork, and the waiting period to actually get approved is longer as well, it sounds like.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, the less expensive way is definitely family petition. Okay. But with the work contracts and things, they're much more laborious as well.
Right.
You have to apply for prevailing wage. You have to get that wage. Then, you have to file certain forms with the Labor Department. And then the employer, don't forget the employer who's waiting for a worker has to interview unemployed people from unemployment. There's they have to leave the job open for 30 days. They have to interview all the people from unemployment that are coming for the job. And we have to disqualify any American or authorized worker in the US that supposedly says they're qualified for that job. So this is not an easy process for the employer. I mean, even when we did in the past, they could not miss a phone call. We had to give a description of every person that applied for the job, why they didn't qualify. We couldn't discriminate based on age, race, or gender. I mean, just to give you an example, once we did a person who was supposed to be a cement finisher or something, or a foreman in a construction company. Well, the one guy that was qualified, I said to the Portuguese contractor, I said, you have to hire him or else you're not going to get your person in. So he hired him. What did this person do? He was supposed to supervise laying of the cement on a mall, in a mall. He sat in his car because he was overqualified. He sat in his car for 3 days, and then the employer had to redo all the cement because it was lopsided. But I mean, it got approved for our foreigner, but just to give you an example, that's the extent that the employer is willing to go to.
Wow.
So usually in the past, like you were saying, they came, they worked on the ranch. These are people that they knew the quality of their work.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have people who they're going to wait over there, and who's going to do this?
Right.
Unless it's
Right.
like your relative that has a big company and they're willing to, do all this
Right.
for you.
Or if there's things that are kind of very specific to Portugal, and the only things that come to mind really are, one, if you teach Portuguese as a language, but even then you don't have to be from Portugal to do that, right? But that would be one.
Well,
And then
that
the
you
other
you
one,
have to be able to also speak English, which a lot
right,
of Portuguese do right now.
right,
George
right.
can testify to that. He's
Yeah,
been to
yeah.
Portugal 3 times in the past 4 years.
Nice. And then the other thing when you're talking about construction is someone that does the calçada work, right? I mean, I
Oh,
think that's
the
very specific
yes,
to Portugal,
carpentry,
right?
yes.
And that kind of skill is I think a pretty specific skill. So, but I mean, if I'm sure we could think of a few others that were, pretty, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody in the US that did that. And so making the
No, no,
case for
that's
someone to come
true.
over. So,
No,
I mean, but
even
outside of that,
even in other countries, like I was in Argentina at the opera house. The Pavarotti said it was one of the best opera houses. There was
mhm.
a sign outside that said these steps were done by masons from Portugal.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah, that's
That's
cool.
very
Really
cool.
cool.
Very cool. So we're coming up on our time here pretty soon. So I just wanted to address one other item, which was, let's say somebody just wants to, I want to go live in the United States. Maybe I'll work, maybe I won't, but it's always been my dream to get to the United States. Can someone start the application process to become a citizen, like without having lived here or without a work visa or anything like that? They just want to apply. Like,
Mm,
what's the path? And
no,
so if I equate it to, so for me applying for Portuguese citizenship, right? I mean, maybe one day I'll live there, but I really just wanted to have my citizenship, and so I ended up applying through marriage. And we didn't have to prove residency or job or anything like that. Is there a similar path here in the
well,
United States?
well, if you have parents or grandparents that are citizens, they can
Mm-hmm.
apply for the grandchild. There's circumstances that they,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have to have, like you had that link, right? The
Yes.
Portuguese link.
Yes.
You
Mm-hmm.
have to have an American link. You can do
Okay.
that, but you have to have a link.
Got it.
You can't just, yeah.
You can't just,
And
I want
no,
to
you
go.
can't.
Yeah.
And for
Okay.
example, like even children who the parents are citizens, if they live in the US a certain number of years after after a certain age, they can derive citizenship from their parents and also from grandparents, depending, there's some rules. Yeah, there has to
Got
be
it.
a link.
Got it. And is there, so like in Portugal, to apply through grandparents, there's a language requirement. Are any of the paths to American citizenship, do those require an English language requirement,
No, through the grandparents? No.
or through any path to apply for
No,
citizenship
if
here?
you're deriving citizenship through a relative, no,
Hmm.
you don't have the
Okay.
English requirement.
Okay. Um, of course, I don't know that it's an official requirement for the work one, but I imagine the employer would
Oh, yes,
require you
yes,
to speak English.
yes, it is.
Yes. Um, Anything else that we didn't cover that you think is
Well, I guess
important for
it's
people?
not required for, like, if you're a nanny, or I mean, if you're a live-in maid,
Yeah.
So, and a lot of Portuguese women used to come, they were domesticas for people in Portugal. They
Mm-hmm.
even had, the fishermen, things like that. You don't have to speak
Right.
the language, they had their fishing experience. They come over and work at like Fulton Fish Market in New York or some fish
Mm-hmm.
market.
Mm-hmm.
So if the job didn't require the language, of course not. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think is important for people to know, specifically who want to come from Portugal?
No, I think that's it.
So I think in the this will be archived on Facebook, but also on YouTube, and both on Facebook and YouTube, we will include a bunch of links to, if you want to apply through this path, go to this, here's the form. And if you want to, and we'll work with you to get kind of all those links and everything, to kind of direct people where to start. So I think that will be helpful, but I think this is a good starter conversation and hopefully answers a lot of questions that people have, certainly that we get as a national organization, from people that want to come and live and work here. So thank you so much, both of you, for your time, and thanks everybody for watching. I hope that it was helpful.
Yeah, it's a changed world. We do what
It is.
we can do, right?
Right. But thank you again. And yes, if anybody has further questions after this webinar, you can reach out to us at palcus@palcus.org, or send us a message on Facebook or anything like that, and we'll get back to you with questions or with your answers. But thank you both, George and Cindy. Really good to see you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Angela.
you. Have a good day. All right. Thanks.
Too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.